I'll just come out and ask this question. Why do you believe in God? And if so, why not Apollo or Thor instead of Yahweh?
The arguments for polytheism were arguments for taking I may almost say aspects of human nature and magnifying them into gods. Not human nature, but nature too. And so, for example, you have the river god and the god of lightning, the god of thunder, the god of the oceans, and so on. In that sense, gods functioned as, you may say, special types of surrogates for human beings. And this is partly why polytheism collapsed when it was confronted by the challenge of monotheism. It collapsed really all over the world, so that polytheism is not real today. We talk about Greek mythology, we can't take it seriously, even though the Greeks really did believe that there was a place called Mount Olympus somewhere on the earth, and that these gods did exist. We can't take that seriously today because we can see very clearly that polytheism is, you may say, a projection of human attributes. Now, that's not true of monotheism, and you have these astounding claims, for example, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, that God made the world. And not only did God make the world, but he made the world, he created time along with the world. And think about that. This is an incredible statement that is made hundreds of years before Christ, and it's made by people with no access to any scientific experiments whatsoever. The idea that time itself is a property of the universe. This is stated, not only stated in the Bible, but then affirmed by a tradition of Christian interpretation of the and Jewish interpretation of those verses. And yet you would have to admit that this is a completely valid issue in modern cosmology. This is nothing that can be dismissed. We can't say, oh, gee, we've refuted that a long time ago. But that's just a bunch of nonsense. On the contrary, that is an extremely counterintuitive statement, astounding and inexplicable when it was made, that can actually be defended today with the best findings of modern astronomy, physics, and cosmology. And so anyway, the point is, to me, God is a reality in my life. The concept of God makes sense as an explanation for a universe that doesn't have any other explanation. And so to me, it's a confluence of arguments, historical, philosophical, and scientific, that support the idea of a creator.
Right. So I agree that the stories are interesting, and I'm a big fan of all kinds of myths. But the spot where I find hard to go to is that, I mean, the Bible, for example, was written by human beings, and who claim to be divinely inspired. And why do people trust that they were divinely inspired in the right way, or that they were divinely inspired at all?
They don't. In other words, look, at the time of early Christianity, there were literally innumerable texts, all purporting to be divinely inspired. So it's not as if the Christians said, oh, gee, Fred, you say you're divinely inspired. Okay, you got to go in the Bible. That's nonsense. I mean, there was a deep process of examination that actually lasted 300 years. The Bible as we know it, and the basic Christian doctrines as we know them, weren't consolidated until 400 years after Christ, and involved a discriminatory process of examination and debate, both philosophical and theological, over a long period of time. So unless you at the outset reject the possibility of divine inspiration, and I think that is actually a mistaken thing to do, because many people who we would consider secular, I mean, Emerson, for example, poets, have always talked about the idea of a muse, and what they mean by a muse is that there is an inspiration that can somehow come to us from the outside, rather than being generated entirely from the. So unless you dismiss all of this, dismiss all of art, all of literature, as somehow being nothing more than something that you may say defies external explanation. But even a creative person in the scientific domain would have to admit, the idea came to me as opposed to I generated the idea. And our deep sense that ideas come to us, I think, opens up the possibility of transcendence. In other words, transcendence is not an exclusive prerogative of religion. It was there in philosophy, and it's always been there in the arts.